Good afternoon. Welcome to the Lily Pod. I want to have a talk with you regarding oneness. There's a lot of talk about oneness. What does that really mean in the Vedas, in ancient yoga? Basically, yoga is very close to physics, and yoga talks about the world above the atom and beneath the atom. There's even a name in the ancient Vedas, Anu. Anu means both man and atom. And in ancient yoga, they say there's a world underneath the atom, the electron, proton, neutron, quark, underneath all that. They say that the God force, the Shiva force, Brahman, is underneath the atom. And above the atom, you have the material world. When yoga first came about, the original traditional yoga said that these two worlds have nothing to do with each other. That there's the world of God, which is subatomic, and then there's the world of material things like this pool, and that these two worlds have nothing to do with each other. Later on, several centuries later, a branch of yoga came out called Kashmir Shaivism. Kashmir Shaivism said, that's nonsense. The Cadillac automobile and the God force are really coming from the one force, because there's only one force of creation. So Kashmir Shaivism said, yes, there's a world underneath the atom, which is invisible and powerful, and then there's a world above the atom, and if you put several atoms together, you have a Cadillac. But there's no use in separating the two. And I like Kashmir Shaivism because when it talks to you about your lives, it says, all right, meditation is one aspect of your life. In meditation, you go to a place of nothingness, but also your office and your work is another aspect of your life. Both of them are integrated, and the way to think about oneness is you have this creative force of nature underneath the electron and the quark and the atom, and that force allows the first two atoms to gel together, and when the atoms gel together, we have your office building, or we have your physical body. In that sense, there's no separation. Your body comes from several billion atoms gelling together. And underneath those atoms, there's Brahman, the God force. As a matter of fact, yoga says that your soul, which is a subtle energy field surrounding your body, is made up of exactly the same energy as the God force. According to yoga, there's no difference between your soul and the God force. Your soul is just a component of the God force surrounding your physical body, but it's not a different energy. What is the other component in a human being? It's called ego, but yoga calls ego false. Ego is this name, John Smith, CEO of a chemical plant, job description, last name, first name, and all that. And yoga says you're just fooling yourself if you call yourself John Smith. And one would argue why. And yoga says, well, if I take John Smith into deep meditation, as soon as his brain waves quiet down and he goes into what we call transcendence, which means the brain is so calm, you're no longer attached to your thoughts. As you start detaching from your thoughts, something strange happens. The name John Smith is lost in favor of an inward gaze. Your gaze comes inward, and you experience this vast space of quietude. And in that vast space of quietude, the name John Smith doesn't appear. Neither does your job description. And you don't even know what town you're from. However, in that quietude, in that vast space of quietude, something else arises. It's called wisdom. This happens every time. As the brain waves quiet down with meditation, you sink into a vast space of quietude. Out of that quietude, because your brain is relaxed, you get wisdom. and you get something that is called pure consciousness. Pure consciousness in yoga means thoughtless intelligence. If you go up to somebody in MIT, top of the class, and say, do you know you have thoughtless intelligence? And in most of the West, they'll think you're crazy because they think that IQ and thinking is what gives power to man and woman. And yoga disagrees. Yoga says there's two ways to have force. One is for man to sit behind a Caterpillar D9 bulldozer, bulldoze through the forest, and prove the power of man over nature. That's called brute force, and it's done with IQ and intellectual mind. But then yoga says, you know what? If I can teach you Kriya Yoga meditation through simple breathing, by you following the motion of the breath, you can swing your mind on the pendulum of the breath until your brain waves quiet down. When your brain waves quiet down, suddenly your heartbeat comes down. Your heartbeat comes down, then your respiration comes down, your blood pressure comes down, and something strange happens to you. Number one, you lose the identity of John Smith. Number two, you lose intellectual IQ. But number three, instead of intellectual IQ, you get knowingness, intuition, creativity, and what we call pure consciousness. Pure consciousness means being fully aware of every wake and ripple on this palm, but not having to think about the palm. Like right now, we can watch the sun glowing on this water, but not analyze it. All we're doing is seeing the sun on the water. Seeing is different from analyzing. And in the West, the smart intellectuals have real problems with the concept of thoughtless intelligence. But if you talk to artists and famous writers and famous inventors, they'll tell you that the time for invention is when you're in a state between intellectualization and sleep. I'll give you an example. Thomas Edison, the famous inventor, used to hold a pot between his knees, and in his hands he would hold a ball. And then he would put himself in a half-dazed, relaxed point, to the point where the ball would drop into the pot, meaning his grip had loosened. At that point, between consciousness and supreme relaxation, he would have new ideas about electricity, which metal to use in the light bulb, etc., etc. He had found out how to put himself into transcendence. And what yoga says is, listen, you don't need the pot and you don't need the golf ball. We'll call in Kambiz Naficy, he'll teach you Kriya Yoga. You start to follow the motion of inhalation and exhalation, and as your mind is swaying on the motion of the breath, the frontal lobe of your brain relaxes. You lose the name John Smith, you're not hypnotized, you go into a space where there's less blood pressure, your heart is working really easy, less breathing, muscles are relaxed, and all of a sudden, out of that relaxation comes up wisdom. The intellectual mind has big problems with this argument, but now, of course, even in places like National Institutes of Health in Washington, they found that a moment of meditation has dramatic physiological effects on the brain and the body. A lot of artists, inventors, purposely put themselves into that place called pure consciousness because that's where creativity is. What happens to the ego? Because the name Tom Smith and the ego disappear in mental quietude, yoga says, forget it. Your name Tom Smith is a lie. Why? Because if something was real, why would it disappear when your mind is relaxed? Like love. Love is real. The way you love your sister is real. Even if you go into mental quietude, you're still going to have love for your niece or your sister. But ego disappears. Kathy Miller disappears when your mind quiets down. Therefore, your ego is false. It's a false self. And everything that comes with your ego disappears with mental quietude, which means it's all a hoax. So what does the word yoga mean? Yoga means the union of this false ego with your soul.